My next guest on the Quantum Shift podcast, Gene Sticco, is a former U.S. Air Force Security Forces specialist. After 2 decades of managing complex security and resilience programs for multinational energy corporations, including Shell and BHP, Sticco became the custodian of one of the most unusual Cold War archives ever uncovered: the translated technical notes of his father-in-law, Soviet aerospace engineer Valery Semenov, who was tasked with reverse engineering recovered UFO technology. As the lead investigator and co-author of Engineering Infinite, Earth's first interstellar blueprint, Sticco brings together frontline experience, deep institutional knowledge, and unprecedented access to these documents to reveal a rare, technically grounded look at the UAP reverse engineering efforts. He holds advanced studies from the Naval Postgraduate School, Harvard Extension School, and the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, along with multiple certifications in national response and infrastructure resilience. My conversation with Gene was absolutely mind-bending. Enjoy it. Gene, welcome to the Quantum Shift podcast. Before we get started and share the incredible thing that you shared with me, I would love for you to tell the audience, who is Gene and how did we get to this point?
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Who's Gene? I'm just a plural retired disabled veteran, as it stands right now. No, before all that, I had a great career. Former U.S. Air Force. I was in security forces. I was in for 9 years. Sort of got to that point. If you do 10, you might as well do the other 10. I had an amazing Air Force career. I got to do a lot of exciting things, but then I transitioned and it was sort of one of those phone calls. Somebody that I knew in the State Department had known some people in the oil and gas business. They were looking for initially a bodyguard for their CEO. I had some protective work. I'd spent about 2 years on, it's called the Elite Guard for headquarters U.S. Air Forces in Europe. For the 4-star general, the 3-star, the families. So I had some training and experience in that space. And, so I left the Air Force, walked into the oil and gas business. And before I knew it, wound up making that my career. And, that was a combination of really living and working in a gray zone of a sense. After the initial job I had with that first company, then I started moving more into contract intelligence type roles that embedded me inside the companies. And I was hired by the company, but sort of had multiple dotted line relationships, as we'd say in the corporate world.
So when you're saying that they're embedding you within the company, is that for you to like recognizance for the company, or what did that mean exactly?
Well, I mean, the job itself is focused on protecting critical infrastructure in the most simplest forms, oil and gas facilities. So I'd have a portfolio depending on where I was and what the job was. So initially, my first one was actually overseas in Eastern Europe and Lithuania. And that was during a period where the company I was with was privatizing the entire national oil consortium. So we're talking about 10 years after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Mm.
Lithuania, the rest of the Baltics are trying to align themselves more westernly than they were with Russia, though politically there was, a lot of internal debates. But fortunately, Lithuania had a president who was pretty much American. And had given up his citizenship and gone back over there to become president, but he had worked in the federal government for decades.
Okay.
And so, I was managing all of the risks that are associated with it. And later in my career, we sort of categorized all of those to start putting things in nice buckets. But, when you talk about risks in the oil and gas industry, from a security perspective, it's, some of the expected and unexpected ones. So terrorism,
Sure.
the influences of organized crime, violent crime in the areas where companies operate, theft of information, not
Right.
necessarily, it kind of goes hand in hand with the cybersecurity aspects, but we're talking the actual somebody goes in and removes documents on the physical side.
Right.
There's threats from political instability, civil unrest, and extremist activism.
Mm.
The
Sure. Right. Yeah. They want to
everything
blow the
from the
place up. Right. Yeah.
saboteurs to the I'm going to handcuff myself,
Right. Right.
to
Right.
a
Right.
tree kind of thing.
And so you mentioned your background in the military and then you were doing security. What exactly, not to pull back, but I'm just trying to understand, like, obviously you seem very qualified to do those jobs. What qualified you for it? What training in the military did you take in order to do that? Like, when you mentioned security, yeah, I had some experience in security. What does that mean? Or can you not talk about it?
No, no, you can talk about it. I mean, so my specialty in the Air Force was at that time, it was properly called security specialists. So
Oh,
you
okay.
had law enforcement and you had security. Law enforcement, where you're, vast majority writing speeding tickets, manning the front gates,
Right, right.
going to domestic disturbances on base. You were a small town cop.
Uh,
The other side of it with a security specialist, the work that did, the primary training was about providing physical security and all of the systems associated with it for nuclear weapon systems and aircraft. So, the nuke side sort of speaks for itself. On the aircraft side, you have the base security itself and making sure people coming to and approaching and working on the aircraft are who they're supposed to be.
uh,
But there was another aspect where we had flyaway teams. So we would fly with the aircraft to locations around the world that where they particularly might not be going to an Air Force base. And
mhm.
then on the ground, we would provide the security for that aircraft, would
Uh,
provide security for the team, for the pilots sometimes as, they went into wherever it was they were going. So that was, that's sort of the day-to-day job.
yeah.
Then I had the opportunity as I got up in rank to get involved in doing things like the overall base security risk assessment. So
Got it.
looking at the fence line, the perimeters, the clear zones, all of those things that are, somewhat dictated by policy, but then actually, boots on the ground, walking around, making those kinds of assessments.
And what years were you doing that? I'm just like,
So
I'm trying to
yeah,
figure out.
90 to 99.
90 to 99.
Yeah.
Okay. And where are you from originally?
I'm originally I'm from Somerville, Mass, which is a suburb 2 miles, if that, from downtown Boston. I grew up in the section of town called Winter Hill, which at the time, in the days since has become notorious for being the territory of Whitey Bulger.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I know that.
Yeah, what's the Johnny Depp film Black
Yeah, yeah.
Mass? Jack Nicholson's character in The Departed was based on his stories. That was my neighborhood I grew up in.
Tough neighborhood. Yeah.
It could be,
Suffice to say, yeah.
could be. It's certainly not as certainly wasn't as affluent and chic as it is today. That was quite a surprise coming home after almost 30 years.
Yeah, yeah. Was it a military family, or you just always knew you were gonna go to the Air Force, or how did you
No,
end up?
yeah, I mean, quite the opposite. I talk about it in my new book. My father was tied to some of those folks there in the Winter Hill and the North End of Boston, the Italian North End.
Mhm.
Most of my family, I grew up in that
Right.
environment, and those were the folks who were around me on one side. My godfather was a Boston cop, which sort of
Jeez.
made for
It
and
really was The Departed, right? Like,
and again, that was the neighborhood, right? I mean, that
yeah,
was,
yeah.
that's normal. He was in fact for a number of years, he was the president of the Boston Police Patrolmen's Association, the union. And in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, he kind of became infamous because he led like one of the first strikes of the police
Wow.
against the mayor of Boston at that time. And I remember as a kid, like, seeing him on the news, and then 5 minutes later, he's at our house. And I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. But I definitely took more towards, that side. And he was prior military, he was Army. He had these great collections of like all sorts of World War II memorabilia. He used to,
Right.
get stuff from all over the world. And yeah, so my thing was I originally thought about becoming a Marine and a Marine MP. And when I went to the recruiter's office, they kind of don't guarantee the jobs the same way the Air Force does. And when I sat down with the Air Force guy, he's like, "Oh, here's the 2 things." And I was like, "Oh, that security one looks pretty cool," because you also have this air-based defense mission, which is going in and doing like the Army stuff. So
Right, right.
after Air Force basic training, you go to the Air Force Police Academy, and then you go to the Army basic skills course. So kind of go through Army basic training again
Well,
in
that's
that whole
cool.
process.
Yeah, it's pardon my ignorance about with the unit. That's fascinating though. So 90, you get there, you're doing it, 99, and then you end up in Latvia conducting this security detail. And I already know your story. So you land in Latvia and then take it from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it was just sort of, I always joke. I said, I've never like really interviewed for a job in my life. Everything's always started with a phone call and
Right.
then maybe, a fly out and have lunch. This was one that like literally the guy called me on the phone a Wednesday afternoon. And by Monday, Sunday night, I was, boarding a plane to
Wow.
head to Europe for, at the time it was just supposed to be 6 months. I wound up being there almost 2 years. But yeah, essentially walking into the situation where the politics of it were still this very East versus West type mentality. You
Right.
had this American company that got this sweetheart deal to take over management of this entire consortium that ran throughout the entire country, all the way, from the border with Russia via pipeline, pumping stations along the way, the pipeline itself to the refinery, from the refinery to another pumping station on the coast, from that pumping station to a single point mooring, this huge device in the middle, 1 mile out to the Baltic Sea, where oil tankers would come to and hook up and fill up and, take product out of there. So it's this huge system. And it was fraught with corruption. The Russian mafia
The
had their
unofficial hierarchies that you
yeah,
said.
yeah, the Russian mafia had their hands on it, and the real precursor to me going there was that the former the Lithuanian who was the former president of the company, obviously American management comes in and he's got to go. Well, this guy, so this was I got there October, this was like July 2000. This guy, his son, and their driver are kidnapped on their way home from the airport. So the guy picks up his son at the airport, disappears along the way. The only evidence or leads they sort of had, on superficially, were that they were stopped by the police outside of Vilnius. Obviously, it wasn't the police, or if it was the
This is
police,
somebody posing as the
they're
police.
not the ones that they did it for somebody else.
Yeah.
And I was probably there like a year and a half when they finally found the guy, the driver, and the son of their bodies. They were decapitated, shallow grave in a very,
My
mafia controlled territory. And I still think to this day the heads have never been found.
oh God.
So my job was to make sure that didn't happen to anybody else, including myself.
Wow. And it couldn't have just been you. Was it like a department?
Yeah, so, initially so there was a Lithuanian security department, or I should say a company, and this sort of speaks to the corruption, in a sense that was going on, if you can imagine, right? So when the announcement was made that Americans were taking over management of this consortium, the security department broke. Now, it was an internal department.
Right.
It broke off from the company, incorporated itself, had the company as its primary shareholder, as an incorporated entity, then contracted its services back to the company, on top of having a couple of other little security gigs around town. I think they had a bank and one or two other things. you know,
Wow. In the book, I'm like looking at a quote from your book. You said you learned how corruption really functions. That's like that's the
yeah, I
master
mean,
class.
you know, if you ever worked in a corporate environment, in a business environment, I know you're a business owner, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, imagine the head of HR walks up to you and is like, you know, I decided I'm going to incorporate,
Crazy.
you know, I'm going to incorporate as my own company. Don't worry, you're going to be my primary shareholder.
Yeah. It's just nuts.
Right? But that was the situation, and you know, and the long story of it is, you know, it all had to do with a major piece of the corruption infrastructure, let's say, that was going on there. But yeah, I mean, it was those kinds of things. You know, I found I have a, you know, in the book they had a greenhouse that was recovering steam from the refining processes to heat, and they were growing cucumbers and other vegetables, and some of it went to employees, but then the department took them and they went to farmers markets and sold cucumbers at farmers markets and things like that.
So you're there, you're doing this very big and, from my perspective, scary job. How long are you doing the job before you meet your lovely wife?
Well, how long I was doing that job? So let's see, I left there at 15 years.
Okay.
Yeah, so that
What
was
was that gap? So you're doing the job, then what? And
then
then
life go yeah, so, you know, I finished, as I after I left there, I came back to the US to sort of recoup and repatriate and do, you know, try and be a family guy. By that time I was divorced, from my first wife, and trying to get on with life, did, you know, some contracting work again as the TSA was coming into the airports and doing that. So where I was in central New York.
I was gonna say, you mentioned that you were there September of '01. I'm like, it must have been difficult to travel abroad and then to be in the line of work. It's a good line of work to be in back then.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. You know, so that, you know, now we're in at the point in what 2002 to 2003 where the TSA has been created and now we're federalizing the airports and all that. So, I worked for a little bit in that, and then the call came from Shell Oil in Houston, and I went to Shell in Houston and had taken and actually started a role, uh, as they were expanding the corporate security footprint, and the world, everything started getting more and more crossed over
Right,
between government and corporate interests, and DHS was standing up at that point.
right,
They were creating these sector coordinating committees. There was legislation that came out, around maritime transportation security, big interest in, you know, the oil and gas business
sure.
also. And so we were looking at, again, assessing all the facilities, making major investments, major improvements, or in some cases, just establishing some of the most basic types of security infrastructure and practices. So my focus was on refineries, pipelines, and the U.S. distribution network for Shell. I had a counterpart that did chemicals and maritime, and another counterpart that did the lubricants business and aviation fuels. So we, you know, that was again thrust of our work, working with the government, getting government people introduced to the industry as well, so they
Mhm.
understood what the risks and the threats were, and you know, from terrorism perspectives and all that. We had Hurricane Katrina hit in the Gulf
Mhm.
Coast, so responding to that, you know, where you had, you know, probably the most post-apocalyptic type environment,
Yeah,
you know, that we've had in the US and certainly in my lifetime.
yeah.
But, you know, armed people showing up at refineries like, oh, well, it's an oil company. You must have gasoline, and I don't have gasoline for my generators.
Wow.
Or the employees who did stay to get in order to be there to get the infrastructure up and running again, who did have some access to fuel to bring home for their generators, were then getting robbed at gunpoint in their homes because
Wow.
they were the only ones with gasoline in the neighborhood, kind of things.
So funny. I was going to ask you, I'm like, in the book, you said you saw the system break during Katrina. And I was going to say, what's the precise moment you knew no one was coming? I'm like, sounds like those types of incidences were probably, you're like, oh, something's wrong here.
It's funny. I worked for a guy who, so my boss had been in the company for like 30 plus years, and he had always been in human resources. And
Hmm.
after 9/11, they're like, we need people to do security stuff. And he was like a reserve deputy, so he did traffic, on Sundays at churches kind of, but they're like, oh, he's got a badge. So, you're in charge of security. So myself and the guy I work with, we're out there in, post hurricane, New Orleans, gunfights in the streets, bodies float, all the shit, you see on the news. Right.
Yeah.
And he's like, I emailed you something. Did you get it? And I was like, we don't, we're lucky we have this signal right now to be able to call you. Most of the towers and things were on generators themselves, and
Hmm.
those were going down. You could pretty much communicate by text, but to get an actual phone signal that sustained anything was, a rarity. So so never mind trying to get email data lines and all that. So he's like, well, I need you, it's this list of whatever it was. He goes, can I fax it to you? No, there's no,
Not listening.
you know, and then he's like, well, what if I FedEx it? The FedEx hangar at New Orleans airport has been overtaken by the 82nd Airborne Division, right? There's
It's
Black
scary
Hawks.
though. It's scary. It's like as you go down all the normal lines of communication, you're like, nope, nope, nope.
Right. I'm like, so you know what I got? I have a pen and a piece of paper, and we have a signal. So
Hmm.
you give me as much information right now while we have this, and if we miss something, I'll get it from you when we can.
Wow. So you go through this. Was Riga directly after New Orleans, or
No, so still a
like I
decade
really
away
want
from.
to get, I want to get to Riga, but this is I didn't realize how fascinating this part was. I'm like,
Yeah,
don't
well,
worry,
I mean,
everybody that's listening,
to
you're gonna
fast forward.
understand eventually when we get to the Riga.
Yeah, so well, I'll go ahead. I'll speed jump through it now. So, from Houston, I stayed with Shell. I went over to the Netherlands. I was in the Netherlands for 4 years. I had a global portfolio there. Came back, did a lot more contracting work in the private military community space as subcontractors to government organizations and war department agencies and things like that. And it wasn't until about 2017 when I started thinking about retirement, and I was a partner in a security company. And I said, well, we were all reaching out to old contacts. I said, let me go back to the Baltics. And
Yeah,
so it's then after
got it, got it, got
15
it.
years after I left Lithuania when I finally went back. And it was during those trips in early 2018 that I met my current wife.
All right, so now here we go.
Right. It doesn't get any less. It doesn't get any better from here.
I was gonna say I'm gonna buckle up. It's like a roller coaster. I'm gonna pull the thing down, and we're going up the roller coaster. You meet your wife, you fall in love, and then what?
Then we come to the US. We decide, my intention, like I said, I was retired. I wanted to stay in Europe, but she had a young son, and we figured it was better for him to come back to the US to get educated. So I said, well, we'll go back to where I'm from, the
Yeah.
Boston area. And that's where we settled. And so now we're in the late winter 2019, doing all the things, trying to figure out where we want to live,
Mm.
getting him in school. He didn't speak any English.
Wow.
So trying to
And how
do as
old was he?
much we can to throw him to the wolves and get him
Yeah.
involved in things.
What how old was he?
9.
Oh, he's still a baby. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, 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 still young, young enough he was gonna be fine.
Yeah.
But,
Still
it's one of those
still di
things anyone who's, lived in an immigrant family like that,
mm,
he at home, he's only gonna talk to his mother in Russian.
Mm.
And there's no, you know, for as much as she was trying to do the, "No, we're only speaking English," it wasn't gonna happen.
Right,
So
right.
it's like, we need to, you know, we got him into baseball, and
Cool.
it's like, sorry to be a bad parent, but we can't be here, you
Yeah.
know? He's gotta learn to figure it out on his own,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know? And so that's why, and frankly, I was like, I don't care if he starts running with the Crips and the Bloods,
Right.
was he, you know, as long as he was speaking English. So, yeah, so, you know, come the winter, we're doing that, and that's catching her. She's speaking with her dad on the phone, who's in Kazakhstan. He was born there, educated, raised the family in Latvia, and all that. And, you know, telling him, yeah, our son wants to get involved in the Civil Air Patrol, the Air Force Auxiliary, where they teach kids how to fly. And now at, you know, 17, he's almost got his pilot's license.
That's cool.
And the father's, you know, her dad's like, yeah, well, I'm gonna send you some of my old work you might be interested in someday. Her dad was an aerospace engineer. He went to one of the top universities, you know, for it in the former Soviet Union. Stuff arrives, you know, a little package from Kazakhstan arrives, you know, within a week or so. And within a couple of weeks, Nat gets phone calls from the father's girlfriend that he's taken ill. And every day it's a new progression and, you know,
Uh,
organ failures and stuff like that. And, you know, we had just started the immigration process.
right.
And, you know, if you're not aware, when you start that, you can't leave, you know, until
Oh, I
you
didn't
get
know that.
your green card, or you have to apply for in advance special permission to travel. And we're talking late December. We're like, yeah, there's probably not going to be anybody around the office. So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
handle this. And so on the 31st of December, when Nat got up in the morning, she had learned her father had died.
yeah. It's
It
awful.
was actually like the previous day, but with everything, you know, they had like buried him that same day earlier and stuff.
Poor girl.
And that was it. And then we, you know, had a quiet New Year's Eve at home. And a couple of weeks later, you want me to jump right into it, or you want to lead in?
You go, man. You go.
A couple of weeks after that, she wakes up one morning. I had this dream about my dad. He was young and he was in a suit and he looked so good, you know, and I'm like, you know, my heart's like, I remember like my grandmother. I had a dream about like seeing my grandmother, and she would hug me and there's butterflies. And it
Yeah,
was like, you know, I swear it was like a visitation, you know?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I was like, oh, I know, you know, I got you. I know, you know. And she's like, and the weird thing is he hands me these documents in the dream and says, I can't help you with singing, but here. So then I'm thinking, well, he sent stuff. So maybe this is your little reminder, you know, go open what it is and remember him fondly. And when we opened it up, we sat down and stack it. Turns out it was 119 pages, but we both just sort of started flipping through them, typewriting, physics, math, all sorts of schematics. So I'm saying to Nat, what's it say? She's like, "Well, he's refuting Einstein's theory of relativity. He's talking about, you know, that light bends. It doesn't, you know, Einstein's wrong about this." And, you know, and it's like, well, who does that? You know, obviously. And again, I talked to the guy maybe 3 times over video.
Right,
Otherwise just knew, you know, his story is, oh, he was once this brilliant guy. And then after the fall of the Soviet Union, you know, he collapsed along with it, kind of thing.
right.
And then as I'm going through mine and I see these drawings that look like a UFO, right? The round disc thing. So I'm showing them to Nat. What's this say? She reads it. Specifications of the UFO. I'm like, a UFO. She's like, well, yeah, it says UFO, then in parentheses, saucer. What the
What? What? And to remind everybody, right? Like her father was only sending this because his grandson was expressing interest in flying and aerospace, and he said, "Oh, I have some documents. Let me send it." It wasn't like this is really important stuff that you need to see, right? Like it was just, hey,
exactly. Exactly. I mean, had the dream never occurred, probably would have, stuck him in the fireproof chest and
and
been
before we
like
get into
waiting for her
before we get in,
birthday to be like, "Oh, this is from your grandfather."
yeah, like it wouldn't have been a priority. But I'm curious, and before we get into the real stuff, had her father ever talked about this when she was a little girl?
So, you got to remember now everything's like retrospective. She's
Right.
looking back and and now things hit
It's all
differently, I
making
should say,
sense. Yeah. Yeah.
than they did in the moment. So, yeah, she's like, yeah, he always did sort of speak with certainty about UFOs and aliens. He did, and people, he would talk. She doesn't remember exactly what, but she remembers people thinking he was crazy
Mm.
because he's, just going on about the aliens and the UFOs. And so she doesn't remember anything specific.
And where exactly did he work?
Well,
Let's get into
so
it.
she knew like at one point they had lived in Kazakhstan. She knew he traveled back and forth to Kazakhstan. He traveled back and forth to Moscow. What did she think he did? She thought he was a plumber. And she says, and particularly after the fall of the USSR, she remembers going to his workplace and then going to work with him for a day or whatever, and him being sent to like the university or someplace like that to do plumbing work. And I laugh now because I said, actually, plumbers and interest. I had a guy who was a diplomatic courier, and he used to just tell his kid he was a mailman. Right?
Right.
What's a plumber do? A plumber fixes leaks.
Mm,
It gives you access to places
mm,
to do stuff. Yeah,
yeah. Makes
it's
sense. Yeah.
speculation, but
Yeah.
again, for somebody who was trained as an aerospace engineer to suddenly become a plumber, you got to
Right.
kind of, and then you put it in the larger context, you got
Yeah.
to ask
Pretty
the
good cover.
question.
Yeah. Pretty
Right.
good cover. All right. So get into the documents.
Well, the fact is, you know, no idea what they were. Showed them to my friend Mario, who became ultimately a co-author, on the when we published everything eventually. And now he was very much into the UFO subject. So he's, can I send these? I'm like, send them to whoever. I don't know. I was reaching out. I'm 5 miles as the crow flies out of Boston. So I'm reaching out to Harvard, MIT. Surely, if there is a Russian speaking astrophysicist, I'm going to find one there. Can I buy somebody a cup of coffee and tell me, is this like something of importance to the academic discourse, or is it a cool family heirloom, 30 minutes, whatever? No luck. Then I start hitting up the UFO crowd.
Well, did they respond at all or just nothing?
I
Crickets.
either no, mind you, I didn't like send the UFO stuff. I just took a lot of the other pages of the physics and some of the typewritten things and sent, maybe 3 to 4 scans just to give an idea. Now again, I don't know what I sent, so maybe
Right.
somebody did, but I got back maybe 1 or 2 responses of wish we had somebody to help you, but we don't. Um I was familiar with Ancient Aliens. I looked that up,
Right.
started, emailing those guys. Nick Pope wrote back to me. Looks very interesting. Wish I knew somebody who could help you. Suggested I send him to MUFON. I reach out to MUFON. MUFON replies back, we don't have anybody that can help you, but if you want to send us anything, we'll archive it for you. Like, no. And then we started finding just through friends. So I have a friend who's an astronaut, works with the European Space Agency. So sent her a couple of pages of physics. Somebody she knows was like, yeah, looks legit. Somebody else Nat had met in that worked used to worked in IT, but was in a program at MIT for like aerospace stuff. We sat down with him. He again couldn't read them, but he recognized the drawings. He recognized formulas. He,
Right.
looked at it, was like, this looks like nuclear fission stuff.
Okay.
It's like weird, but looks like. So and meanwhile, Mario's like, this is something. This is something. So it's like I'm getting all these contradictory. I've got people around me or who I can sit down with who are like, oh, wow, this is legit,
Right.
in bits and pieces that I gave them. And then I've got the community that I figured would be the ones who would just ignoring it.
And they're ignoring it. Yeah. Bizarre. completely bizarre. And what was Mario's background? You said that he was into UFOs, but what did he do? What did Mario do for? What does Mario do for a living?
So we were stationed together in the Air Force. We met in Germany. He's actually my daughter's godfather too.
Cool. Yeah.
And at the time, so now we're going to go back to 1994, we were just getting computers in the
Yeah.
squadrons.
Yeah.
And they were just starting, they were setting up the land systems and this and that. And so the squadron's like, is anybody into computers and wants to learn how to do this stuff? And Mario's like, yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah.
So it got him off of, walking around planes and staring at nukes all day. And he learned how to do all the networks and stuff like that. And then that's what he's done since. Now he's an enterprise security architect. He does all sorts of big jobs, flies all over the country, and
That's cool.
he's doing
Very cool.
that.
So
Yeah,
smart guy. Not
smart guy,
a knucklehead, right?
self-taught. Yeah, no, and completely self-taught too. That's the amazing thing about it.
Very cool.
Yeah,
So
sharp
you're
guy.
hitting this wall. You're getting stonewalled by the most prestigious universities in the world, and you're giving it to all these different people. Do you get a break? Does somebody say, "I know what this is"?
Nope, nope, nothing. There was what finally happened. So, like I said, this is starting in 2020.
Mm.
One of the things that jumped out to us that we were like really thought was interesting was a part of the body of works. So there's 12 individual works, and there's a couple of them that touch on consciousness and the tripartite nature of human consciousness and developments of civilization and things like that. And in that, now this is 2020, and I've got the video because the video is funny. Nat's translating it, and she's like, he's talking about in 2024, past this sixth gate of the Orion system. And when we pass this sixth gate, 50% of society will experience this conflict between the oligarchy and the in intellect, and there's going to be this bifurcation, my word, of society and stuff. So we're always like thinking about that and trying to figure out, well, what does that mean and what does it look like? Then we're in 2020, we're like, oh, the world is getting weird. And then
Yeah.
we're in 2024. And, you don't have to be like, right? I don't need to tell you what 2024 felt like.
Right. Right.
And then I started seeing online these people talking about there's this shift in consciousness happening and da 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 da. And I'm like, if he's right about this,
So
what else?
yeah. Yeah. So all of a sudden, it's like coming to fruition. What is the context in the notes? Like, how does he jump to speaking about consciousness? Like, what is it about his work that applied to that?
So the three, trying to explain the way you fly the UFO, the way you pilot the craft is through the connection of the craft generating a field that is done by manipulating the magnetic and gravitational fields of the earth to create its own bubble. And then it is navigated through the pilot's interface with what he calls the information energy field. So it's not telepathy, but it is almost like an instinctual thing, because the pilot of the craft is developed consciously to this point where they have access to this information energy field, and then they just gently guide the craft to where it is they want to be. So this section was about time and the ebbs and flows of society and our position in the universe, and how all of these factors feed into this information energy field. And it is this information energy field that our consciousness is working towards becoming more attuned to and resonating with. And so we will be at that level when we are able to resonate with this field. And so consciousness is essentially, so our brain and consciousness is essentially a tuner. We're programmed to do this, but through time, this information energy field is gently reprogramming us generation by generation by generation to be able to do this. 2024 was one of the big updates, the big platform change towards that next shift that needs to happen. If that makes sense.
Okay. Whew. I've got some obvious questions for you. So, one, does he refer to who is piloting said
No,
UFO? No.
no.
Two, is there any reference to, this was recovered here and we're reverse engineering? It's just a picture of a disc and then discussing the physics around how it's
So
piloted.
the best way I can explain it is it's I always had the feeling it was part of a much larger body of work.
Right.
And so again, his age at the time when these would have been written, which is the late 70s, 80, I call it 80 to 2000,
Right.
being generous on both ends. So he would have just been assigned to do something and knock that work out. So that's what these are his notes. Perhaps it's a draft or whatever of doing that. And in order to explain the technical stuff, he has to get into all these other areas and explain those. So
Right.
he's writing this body of work for somebody else.
Got it.
Who's that somebody else? I don't know.
Who knows?
The only clues that are in it are that he refers to, see author's paper on blah, 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 submitted to the Russian Duma, the Russian parliament, 1991 to 1997 kind of thing. So whoever this was being written for, then obviously he knew had access to be able to go to the Russian Duma and access whatever these other papers were that were previously submitted.
Blah.
As far as what craft it is, after I published all this, and just to, cover that quickly. So come mid 2024, I'm like, you know what? We just need to put this shit out there.
Yeah, get it
I
out.
said, I've got no idea. We worked with Mario. He did AI. We used all the tools. We created a little process to do the best translation we can. And then I just self-published it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe we can find somebody that way. Because that's going to be everyone's first thing. Well, did you translate it?
Right.
I don't know if I need to spend time doing that,
Right. Crowdsource it. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I'm like, we'll put it out there, leave it, put it in this bubble, send it into the universe, see what happens. And it really wasn't until June when, again, I kept kind of, and I'm trying to interact with people and get involved online and be like, well, I found this and maybe, and everyone ignores you. So I finally, like in June of 2025, was just said, I'm just going to have a press conference and talk about the book and what we found. And because I had been doing sort of other research, obviously since the 2024 thing, I'm
Sure.
like, now I got to test this. I got to figure out if he was right about this, what else was he right about? Or what else can this tell us? What else can we learn?
Okay. This is so fascinating. I want to hear more about the 2024 reboot update, if you will, software update, and what exactly, either in your interpretation or in his notes, does he say that is? And is it cyclical? And if it is, how long of a cycle is it? And when it does happen, does he speak about what's supposed to happen with us? Or how does he address that, like, kind of like, hey, you'll know that it's happening when?
Yeah. So he doesn't frame it in that way that, it's going to happen. He sort of gives a complete history, let's say, of civilization in terms of these different cycles. And he talks about time being cyclic, not linear, and that societies and civilizations ebb and flow. And so he focuses a lot on, World War II, obviously World War II through the, fall of the Soviet Union, right? So he talks about that there's patterns, that there is a period of development, a period of change, and then a period of decline.
Hmm.
And there's elements of that run in 16, 18, 34, and 54 years. Are each one of these elements sort of, their leapfrog in the development and progress of civilizations.
Interesting.
He talks about, one thing in a 12,000 year cycle and another thing in a 24,000 year cycle. So, he's going through all that. He says, okay, he's got and when he maps it all out, he draws the diagrams and there's charts and graphs that spell it all out. He shows, so 1991 was the fall of the Soviet Union, and 2024, 2020 began the decline of the United States as a
I
civilization,
knew you were going to say something like
and
that.
the
I knew
collapse.
that was coming.
Yeah, and the collapse into, but it's not. So, and in terms of, like, the Soviet Union example he gives, so he says, the collapse of uh the collapse of Russia. Well, it's not so much the collapse of Russia, it's the collapse of this time period, which then begins a new time period. So that's was the collapse
Ideology, like the
of the
ideology gets right, right,
yeah.
right.
So 2024, if you cold red sort of, that is like the collapse of the United States. 2026 will be the collapse of the European Union. 2027 will be the collapse of China, for whatever this cycle is. Look like a dancer as I'm going, if you're
No, but it's interesting because that's literally what I'm thinking in my head. I'm thinking that it's like little wave, little cycles, bigger cycles, and larger.
right, very much like, I mean, very much probably like a wave, if we,
Yeah, like all
want to
kind of
visualize it. Yeah.
collapsing, on itself.
So, so what's that mean? So it's like the same thing for humanity. So we have humanity, we're going through these cycles of development in our intellect and ideas, and as societies, right? And you can look back and say, obviously how societies function then are much different from how they function now. So we are now in this period where, as societies, we are reorganizing. I shouldn't even say organizing, because we are resonating
Mm,
on different levels.
mm.
So we're finding these new frequencies that we're attuned to. And by being attuned to these new frequencies, then we are less likely to be fooled.
Right, right,
We
right.
have, quote unquote, more intellect,
Yeah.
more discernment, more things like that, that we are better tuned to more universal frequencies. All that's the kind of stuff that's in there.
I mean, it's crazy to me because I started this podcast because of that. Like that was my intent, was to raise the vibration of humanity. Like that was the big goal. And I don't know how I was called to do that. I don't know why I was called to do that, but to me this all makes perfect sense and I'm feeling it, like yeah, go.
Last night, I'm up in the bedroom, I'm talking to Nat about something, and it like caught my eye. Was the first like gift I gave her. I think it was for our anniversary or birthday or something. And it was one of those, this night sky of the night that you met, and this and that. And so I have it from Riga and all that. And then I picked this quote from a book called The Chaos of the Stars, which is a fictional love story in essence about the human daughter of Isis and Osiris, who wants to go live in California, and how difficult she find, kind of thing. But there's a beautiful, part of it where it says, no matter where in time and space, or in whatever reality I choose you, I would choose you 100
Right,
times
right,
no matter
right,
which
right, right, right.
reality. And that was the, thing I put up there. And when I gave it to her, she was actually like, thought it was a stupid gift. I had to like really explain it to her, like, oh no,
Right, right.
you know, and it caught my eye last night. And those words, in any reality, and I would choose, and I'm like, oh my,
Makes sense now, right? Yeah.
right? I wrote like this really, I was like all emotional. I wrote this thing on Twitter about it and stuff, and
Yeah,
but
because it's
that's
like
what
all it feels like it's almost like one of those toy puzzles. It's kind of like it clicks together.
I mean, and there's just one more, sorry, it's
Yeah, no,
strange. Nat tells a story about 2015 was 2 years before I met her, was the last time she had actually seen her father, spent time with him face to face, and she was in Kazakhstan, and she was dating a guy who was Dutch at the time, and he had bought her tickets to go there, and so the father knew her boyfriend bought her ticket to go see him and stuff. And they're outside dinner or whatever, and the father's or Nat's having a cigarette and talking with the father, and the father's like, "So tell me, your boyfriend with the CIA, and she's like, "I'm not dating a guy CIA." He's like, "No, he's an American from the CIA. I sent him to you, didn't he?" And she just thinks her father's crazy. Now she's
okay. Okay.
yeah.
Father's a little cuckoo, hitting it, nailing it from nailing the future.
One said to me that a person in advanced propulsion, since this came out, he goes, he said, he goes, either he reverse engineered a UFO or he's a prophet. The
Mm,
words he said to me.
mm.
So I'm sitting in the car and I said to Nat, oh yeah, he said, he's either done this or he's a prophet. And Nat's like, he used to say he was a prophet. He used to, when he'd get mad and people used to, just laugh at him, he'd be like, I'm a prophet.
Wow. Wow.
Not to discredit the body of work. I believe he did look at it too, but maybe he did have that little bit of
But I mean,
prophetic.
if you're in that and you're dissecting it and you're reverse engineering that and you're realizing how the profundity of it probably feel like a prophet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, my career, categorized as, the geopolitical and transnational security issues, risk management, blah, 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 blah. I look at the news, I see, you know, in before 2014, I could have told you, Russia's going to invade Ukraine. When Russia invaded Ukraine and took Crimea in 2014, I wrote, I don't know how many assessments I sent to clients talking about the next Democratic administration will have to deal with the full scale of invasion by Russia into Ukraine.
Mm,
You know, there's a certain aspect of that things only work certain ways.
right.
But man, this is like next level.
Yeah. So of the body of work, like that's insane to me to talk about 2024 and consciousness. What else in the body of work was surprising to you that came out of it?
So what became most surprising was the consistency
Mm,
of the science that was in the book, written in the period in which it was written, which would have been considered fringe at the time, that emerged in the decades following. And, I mean, and I can't speak to it. I'm a patterns guy. I was Intel, right? I'm not a physicist and all the rest of it, but, I at least understand patterns. So, the idea to see that in the period after this was written, there were developments that became public
mm,
that are echoed in there. Okay. There's stuff that happened since he died where it's like, well, he obviously couldn't have updated anything in this, since then. And then there's a consistent alignment and pattern when you look at things like patents that came out of the USSR, out of the US, out of China in the years following the collapse of the USSR. When you begin to look at the US programs, DARPA, propulsion labs, your Lockheed, your DOE even, where they were putting attention and money into systems that align with the body of work. And to try and frame it, it's not that it's just they all investigated similar science.
Right.
They investigated similar packages of science. My father-in-law in one in particular, specifies 2 Teslas at 19 something. And then in, 2003, there's a DARPA RFP for somebody to study this scientific topic and how do we get to the result 2 Teslas at 19, blah, 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 blah. Where'd you get that number from? Why exactly does it have to be that number that you're looking for?
Right.
And over time, doing this sort of assessment, what I essentially found were amongst 75 agencies over the span of, from 1980 to present, and ones that are in the system right now, in SAM, waiting for proposals, that of the pure scientific domains and the combinations of things, there's anywhere, there are upwards of 95% match to my father-in-law's work. If you take all of these programs across 75 agencies and stack the results on top of one another, you've rewritten all of the stuff in here.
Wow.
So, my push, my involvement in this, my passion in this has really become to get in front of like the UAP task force and these people who are saying we need answers. And it'd be like, great, listen, here's what I've found. Here's this body of work. Seems to have a whole lot of answers. So, and I shouldn't even say it seems to have the answers. It has enough there that it might make sense for you to now go to the agencies that did these projects and say, so explain to me why this particular order of things in this, but why would you study these 4 things or develop these 4 things all together? What led you to do that?
Right. Right.
And then at the end say, well, now explain to me why, if I take all of the stuff that you've all just, testified to, the reasons how you came up with it, why is it I take all of this that's all been done between 1994 and 2025, and, I flip through 119 pages of notes from a former Soviet engineer who said he reverse engineered a UFO. Why can I now rebuild that thing based upon all the work you guys have done?
Yeah.
I think it's a simple enough question.
I don't think you're gonna
Nobody
get a
seems to
simple
want to
answer.
ask it
I
yet.
don't think you're gonna get a simple answer though. All right, so it's a simple enough question that, we're all thinking about. I want to hear more about who you've been able to speak to and who you've been able to show it to and what their take on it is.
So, one of the first people who reached out to me actually was another author who's just finishing up his book, and he had found it. I think he found it on Amazon, and he wrote me a nice letter. He's like, "This is amazing," and he was writing a book specifically about sort of the possible technology of UFOs. So he was looking at Paul Hill's stuff from NASA and Hal Puthoff's things from DARPA, and he found this, and he's like, "This is at a whole different level. This is like the engineering of it." And he had concluded his hypothesis is that it is probably the craft that's sort of associated with Kapustin Yar, the Russian Area 51. And coincidentally, I had kind of come to that conclusion myself independently. And then, a month or so later, I get a thing from that guy. I've had a few people so there's a group of scientists involved in the advanced propulsion business who will say that it is informing the areas of work in which they are heavily invested,
Huh.
whatever that means, you can take away from it. So I've sent it to George Knapp a couple
Mhm.
of times. I sent it to him before I published it. I can't say I've had no direct contact with him. I have not yet had the opportunity to have any kind of professional collegial conversation with him
Right.
in order to even get any feedback if it looked like anything that he had turned over to Bigelow and DARPA and did the
Mhm.
IA and things like that. I've sat down, Lou Elizondo has it, seemed to know what it was. I had
What did
sent
Lou
it.
have to say?
He asked me, he's like, you know what this is? Yes, I know what it is. Do you know what it is? He's like, I know what this is. So I sent it to the author Robert Hastings. So this was back in June. Yeah, right after I did the press conference, mid July, he wrote back and he said, he's like, this is over my head. I sent it to David Grush. David said he hadn't seen it. He thinks it's interesting. I said, great. I'd love to have a conversation with him.
Wow.
Never heard anything. Started calling it out online. Okay, let's, again, we're all about transparency and
Right.
getting to the truth and all the rest of it. Let's have a conversation. If you don't want to have a conversation with me privately, then I'm happy to have a conversation with you publicly,
Right.
even if it is one-sided.
Right.
I've sent copies of it. So I wrote a 182-page white paper that I sent to the UAP caucus. I've sent hard copies to Mace, Burchett, the White House, all with, cover letters sort of explaining the interest because, I found things that resemble the language of open source intelligence on Russian weapon systems that's
Wow.
reflected, in the book. No responses whatsoever. And, I had a lot of pings in my analytics from locations that are adjacent to the heavy intelligence community activities.
Mhm.
I've called out a couple of people who run burner accounts and call them out in the sense I just sent them a message after I figured out who it was saying, if you'd like to have a conversation, I'm happy to have a conversation.
You figured out who was behind the burner account. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And after I did one who turned out to be a former Israeli Defense Force lieutenant colonel who now advises down in DC on a lot of national security stuff. And I sent him a nice message saying, shalom, happy to have a conversation with you, l'chaim.
Yeah.
Um, it was like the weekend later, the FBI showed up at my door on a little fishing expedition.
What did they have to say when they show up at your door?
So, it was very professional. It wasn't intimidating. Like I said, it was a fishing expedition. The initial approach was about that outreach because I used to belong to this FBI InfraGard program that was a partnership, private public sector partnership that shared anti-terrorism, information, particularly oil and gas and things like that. Um, and then I said, because he's like, oh yeah, it was this organization. I'm like, InfraGard, was it OSAC, ASAC, ASIS, blah, blah, rambling them all off. And then it was quickly, so what are you up to now? And I'm like, well, that's what I figured you were here about. Um, it was, it was fine. It might have just been trying to get a, feel for who I was exactly, and I did the name drop game with them and my background and all the rest and invited them back. I said, because they mentioned some people who would be interested in this subject particularly. I'm like, come on over, grab a 6-pack of Sam Adams.
Yeah.
We can sit in the backyard. I have cigars. I'll fucking talk to you all day long. Doesn't bother me one bit.
What do you think is the real hesitation? Like, why are these people not getting back? Is it just too real and too hot to touch?
It's problematic in a few areas that I recognize. And so, just a time. put things in the timeline for you. So you got to remember, I really started trying to bust people's balls about this in July.
Mhm.
July through August, and I'm calling out Grush and all that. I get my visit. And then we had the September 9th hearings. And
Mhm.
remember, they were scrambling for who they can get to testify, and nobody was happy about who they got, except they were happy Knapp was going to be there. And lo and behold, Knapp's going to suddenly talk about the papers he brought back from the Soviet Union in 1993.
Yeah.
He's suddenly gonna, after he invited me, now he invited me on, or his assistant invited me to appear, call into Coast to Coast on a Sunday on the radio show, but it
Mhm.
was like 1 a.m. my time. I'm like, I'm not that into this that I'm going to get up at 1 a.m. for it. Uh,
Right.
but I said, but again, what I really want, what I'd really appreciate is a short conversation.
Yeah.
Love to have I don't need to be on Coast to Coast. I don't need to be on Weaponized or anything like that. I just like to have a conversation. And that went nowhere. So yeah, so now they get the hearing, and now after 40 years suddenly wants to talk about, and he submits some papers which are known as the Thread 3 documents, and Luno's going to suddenly talk to Russia and wants to understand what Russia has and all the rest of it. I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. They want to have a discussion about that now, and they want to publicly talk about having the discussion.
I find it so fascinating, and like what a weird human thing for like the people that want truth to be gatekeepers.
Well, here's my read of it. When Nat published or submitted the Thread 3 documents that were part of the hearing, those, in fact, were a missing link for me. Those are the orders that established the program that my father-in-law worked in. There is a one-for-one, point-for-point connection for the materials portion of those orders and the particular subjects that those orders are to investigate. My father-in-law's work is a one-for-one answer to each of those issues that they line up. Now, I caught George at a event out in Las Vegas, and I told him that. George, he's like, oh, yeah, you're the Russian UFO guy. Nice to meet you. Hold on. You know, it's a one-for-one comparison. And he said,
That's
I'd
great.
love to see that. Great. I've emailed it to him. That was in September. Still haven't heard
Crickets.
anything from him.
Crickets.
So my hypothesis is this. I think what Nat brought back from Russia, that the Thread 3 documents were kind of the top sheet, and below that was the complete comprehensive body of work that it was called Secton Section Program. So I think Nat brought back probably the most complete, or a much more complete body of work that covered all of the various aspects of what the program is supposed to do.
Mm.
I think my father-in-law's work is in there. Again, I probably have his early notes,
Right.
and then those were all consolidated in somebody.
Yeah, you mentioned it's like notes because he was presenting to somebody.
Right, I've got like the Dead Sea Scrolls of the Bible, right? I've got
Right, right,
stuff
right,
that
right, right, right,
they
right.
either didn't include or they did something else with, or whatever. And so when Nat gave those over, what happened to those? Well, he tells the story. They went to Bigelow and ATIP and the advanced program. And so they're probably sitting in the classified space somewhere, and everybody knows about them. Now I've come out of left field with perhaps the carbon copy. I know some of these are carbon copies so the original work went somewhere else on
Got it.
some of these, and I've got the part, the blue, the one that's just in blue because there was a carbon
Right.
copy
So
above it.
the assumption is your father-in-law made a carbon copy of what he handed into them, and then
Right,
kept.
and which would have been standard procedure. So most of them originals, some of them are carbon copies, which says to me that you know, either vice versa. He submitted all the carbon copies and held on to the originals of some he submitted the originals and kept the carbon copy of, which wasn't, it was standard practice, when producing this kind of stuff in the system. So I think it's all in there. Somebody said to me, "Oh, well, if anyone's going to recognize what this is, it's Grush, and because he's the guy who explains to all the reps, all the technical stuff and whatnot." So I'm like, "Oh, fantastic! Now I can have like a peer-to-peer conversation with somebody," which never happened either. And so I think they realized it's this that if I am correct, then it makes it difficult for any of them to have a conversation with me about my stuff because technically somewhere some part of it is classified.
Right.
It
Right.
makes it different. They can't just also come out with it and be like, "Oh, we got this stuff and this guy was a Russian physicist." Because number one, they don't know me. They don't know my father-in-law from Adam. I mean,
Right.
somebody could do a little bit of vetting and be like, "Oh, well, this guy is in the system somewhere and, in a
You
different
wanna
area."
share your father-in-law's name or no?
What's that?
Do you wanna share your father-in-law's name or no?
Yeah, so it's Valery Chernohayev, common spelling.
Okay.
So the it is for all intents and purposes, an unvetted source. We have a certain amount of provenance that is, I guess, you got to trust the family of a veteran and, for whatever that's worth.
Right.
And, so it perhaps becomes a bit of a geopolitical a tap dance to just say, well, some documents from the former Soviet Union that were in Kazakhstan are now in the United States, and some jackasses published them and translated them. And, what does that mean? What does that do?
Yeah.
Who knows? But as far as being a politician to speak publicly about them, I get it, right?
Right.
Now, none of that precludes a one-on-one conversation. None of that precludes a phone call. Can you come down to DC? We'll come there. Happy to sit down. And if that is the scenario. And
Right.
now what they're trying to do is regain narrative control over Russian reverse engineering evidence that exists in the United States so that they can either release the full body of work or just hope I go away, or it just dampens me enough that it doesn't become an uncomfortable question for them. And then they can ask the question so they can reset the foundation the way they want it reset and ask the kinds of questions I talk about that should be asked
Right.
based on it. Then they have set up their own control and framework for doing that. To me, that is the most plausible scenario of what's happening behind the scenes right now. Contain, don't amplify me and hope I'm not able to be amplified on my own, which again, if they went and did any due diligence, they should know I'm a giant ball buster. And that's, this is what I was doing in the oil and gas world. I'm a whistleblower in the oil and gas world.
Yeah.
So if they thought I was just going to sit back and go away, I have nothing else to do. I'm retired. I
Yeah.
do this
It's like I was
17,
bored
20
and this
hours a
is
day.
fascinating. Let's go.
I can record with you until, 4 o'clock comes around and I'm ready for my nap.
Yeah.
And then I can, then I can struggle through it. I have nothing better to do than put all of this together. And so that's what I work on. So that's the situation I think we're in. I think that I don't want to seem so arrogant as to say it's because of me. Knapp started talking about Russian UFO and Luna's talking about it on September 9th. It's super coincidental.
Yeah.
It's super nice that the stuff that went in there was kind of the missing thread that I needed to really set this shit on fire.
Yeah.
If that's what they were looking for, they're going to get it because that's exactly what it's been able to do. Now I've got a paperwork trail that is correlated to the public historic timeline, supplemented by this paperwork trail where I have a body of work that is the direct answer to a set of official Soviet government orders. Um, it's a timestamp
Yeah.
almost, a scientific and UFO reverse engineering timestamp where you can go backwards and begin to look at these pulses, as I've come to call them, of a crash retrieval, a rumored crash retrieval program, a rumored crash, whatever you want to call it, but then a period of scientific development
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
becomes, well, again, prior to these, so the peer, if you go back to, was it Magenta in Italy,
Yeah.
there's this period of scientific development, which is an early precursor to my father-in-law's body of work, reverse engineering a UFO.
Wow.
There's Roswell, which is a precursor to another area. There's a period of the scientific development. There's the period he's in, and there's the incident in the Russian forest where they turned
Yeah.
soldiers to
Yeah.
stone, and Chernobyl, and we got all this, and Wright-Patterson, and the Maelstrom, and all these, everything. Observation, period of observation, or I'm sorry, event, period of denial, period of scientific advancements that feed in. And then you get on the other side of my father-in-law's work, you have the fall of the Soviet Union, the brain drain of science, 2 million physicists and scientists out of the former Soviet Union into the United States, into the Department of Defense, into AFPL, into Lockheed, guys that showed up and 5 months later had top secret clearances working on missiles and NASA and defense.
I want you to go through that again because that is riveting to me. The timelines mapping up in the ebb and flow of patents, developments, geopolitical activity, and then the work. Give that to me one
Yeah.
more time, please.
So it's massive. So if you can imagine, you just set a timeline from whatever date you want. Now I've gone like as far back to the 1800s airship sightings, and there was an alleged one in somewhere in the US, the Midwest somewhere. But to me, it all really starts with World War II, and more particularly Magenta in Italy in 1930 or whatnot. There's a report out of a Soviet colonel general who was one of the heads of the armed forces at the fall of the Soviet Union. And he talks about how at the end of World War II, the Russian officers taking inventory of captured German scientists and materials recorded two saucer craft. And it's, pretty established. Germany was, doing their own thing on that. Um, but he talks about that. He talks about in his book, which actually came out in 2016, 2017, that at the fall of the Soviet Union, there were a group of hardcore KGB agents who hated that Yeltsin was sort of opening up the archives to the West and inviting all this cooperation on all intelligence matters. And he wanted to have this sort of unprecedented degree of cooperation on the one hand. On the other hand, you had a bunch of scientists who were gathering up whatever they could to sell to the United States, or, some stuff was sold to France on UFOs,
Wow.
but others, were trying to use it as their ticket out of the USSR to immigrate, which it seems a number of them were successful doing.
Yeah.
And then what he talks about is this small group of officers who took the materials and put it in the hands of trusted people to keep it. My father-in-law was, to his dying day, a diehard communist in party member. The few times we talked, we had good laughs about it.
Mhm.
But he was he fit that profile of the
Trusted,
diehard
trusted, loyal, not going to sell it
patriot.
to anybody. Yeah. Right.
Right. So so you've got that in the timeline, but like I said, there's this thread where you can, if you use this body of work as a marker for both temporal and scientific purposes, then you begin to see that pattern of the events, the denials,
Right.
period of technological development, which reflects earlier versions of some of the same theories.
Right.
And my father-in-law's stuff, which if you took it later, obviously shows advancements. There's there's the first assessment I ran comparing against the US programs. So I found like 46 programs, um, and there was like over 1980 to 2000, like a 1.5 billion, 1.5 billion in spend, right? Over the course of 20 years.
Mhm.
From 2000 to 2025, it's 75 agencies and 150 million. So there's in that following that brain drain period, fall of the Soviet Union, they start getting into 96-ish, people start showing up, and by 2000, people being embedded in their jobs. You see this exponential, this 10 times leap
Yeah. Oh,
in
went to
program.
150 billion. So 1 billion to 150 billion.
Right, 1.5 billion over 20 years
And then,
to 150 billion
yeah, sorry, you
over
said
the
million.
next
I was
25
like,
years.
yeah, all right, billion.
Yeah.
Whew. All
So
right. I need you to, obviously everything that you said so far is based off of, it's like a quantitative analysis of what you have in front of you, right? You're a quantitative guy. Let's have some fun. Let's get qualitative
all
and let's
right.
speculate a little. Um, what do you think is the reality of this finding, and what do you think is really going on? Like, really, what I'm asking you is like, who was piloting it? When was it recovered? Who knows about it? There's all sorts of theories about uh, dark ops that are functioning behind all these governments that are developing this for national security, which is fascinating in and of itself. But the thing that just has my head spinning isn't the UFO stuff, Gene. It's the consciousness stuff. Like, that's the stuff where I don't know about, like, that's the stuff that I see percolating and bubbling up because you hear guys like, brilliant people like Eric Weinstein from Harvard, and he's, talking about how the physics just doesn't make sense, and how, all these sightings don't make sense because it's doing all these weird things and it's this changing shape. These UAPs are changing shapes and they're communicating with people. Like when people are saying something to it, they're moving. So it could be piloted by consciousness. You seem like a very smart guy. What do you think it is? What do you think is
Play
going
at
on?
least play one on TV.
Yeah, exactly. You got to curl your mustache right after you say that.
It's the only reason I grew it.
Exactly.
You know? So here's my read on the situation, and it's, probably a lot of it's gonna be unpopular, and it's, gonna be boring compared to what I think a lot of people say. So I have no doubt there is life beings of which we are not familiar operating these craft. I don't believe we are. I believe when we see them, that is the anomaly. I think, based on things I've heard, from other I think the idea that these things are all around us all the time and we are just not tuned to see them is probably true.
Mhm.
There are aspects of the work when it comes to the mechanics of the structured vacuum and how they move in between the ether and things like that. I'm like, all right, I can buy that. And maybe this is what it's all about, is what I can buy and what I can't
Right.
about the whole thing. So, I think when, obviously what we are seeing is extraordinary, but I think it is probably more part of the natural world than it is the paranormal. It's just
Right. Right.
paranormal to us because we're not used to it. We haven't been conditioned for it. So I'd say it's part of the natural world. I think what we see sometimes in this, where people say the crafts are alive and they morph, and I think that is just our perception again, based on both the limitations of our brains to process the information, as well as the optical illusion that's created by this craft that has created its own magnetic and gravitational field that it is operating within. So it's like if you're, driving along and you think the moon's following you, well, it's not.
Right.
Same thing. You think the craft is morphing and it's probably not. I think they are much less interested in us than we like to think they are.
Mhm.
There are probably elements, there are probably periods of time and periods of history where they were more direct, more interested, more trying to, experiment, whatever you call it. I don't think they're all doing that. I
Right.
don't think these things are flying around in the sky just to give us a show, just to send us signals, just to, try to get us to guess what they're doing. And only a few people are privileged enough to be able and intellectually enough to comprehend the message that they're trying to send. I don't doubt that the people believe that's what's happening,
Sure.
but I don't think that is what's happening. I think they are going about their business, whatever their business is, and it has very little to do with all of us on the ground.
Right.
We are, this issue to them is collateral damage
Right.
for whatever the bigger purpose is. Now, does that not mean that some people and in some ways there is not attunement to them? There would be, just by the nature of my father-in-law's work itself. It talks about we are on this journey to becoming more attuned with the universal frequencies and all the rest of us. So a lot of us just might be at different levels,
Right.
certainly, and perhaps that has a lot to do with who and how things are seen
Sure.
in that sense.
I'm assuming that your father-in-law does not speculate in his paperwork who the pilot of the vehicle was or why or what. It's just
What the
very
It's just purely,
science.
this is the thing in front of me, and here's the breakdown of it, not how it got there, what it was doing. The only thing he talks about, there's a reference where so it uses a compact thermonuclear fission system that creates energy that feeds in plasma that feeds into these solenoids that help create the magnetic fields and everything. And in that, he talks about, there's the phrase reads something like, the large craft that was recently extracting plasma from the sun as an example of something. So he's talking about something that happened. Whoever reading this is well aware of whatever it was that happened, that had to do with a large
Like a mothership.
being near the sun and extracting. See, we wound up translating it as water because that was like the translation, but obviously there's not water on the sun. So we're working with some physicists now who have come forward who are like, oh, let me help you tighten all this up. But, again, it's probably talking about extracting either plasma or a hydrogen compound, or creating a hydrogen compound based on something extracted from the sun.
Whoa. Dude.
Yeah. Right.
So
So
he's basically referencing a mothership getting power from the sun, and it's sort of matter of fact in his scientific analysis.
yeah, I mean, again, it's like whoever reading this is going to be like, oh yeah, that's right, I remember that, and
Right.
very
He's thinking of
nonchalant.
it
This
like it's common knowledge
common knowledge,
in
like
the
this shit
context.
happens
Yeah.
all the time, right?
Does your wife recall like anything when she was growing up? Your father-in-law said that he was a prophet. Does she recall him speculating like his perspective or
No, again, not particularly outside of, if you said, well, did he believe in yours? Oh yeah, yeah, he believed in him.
and
He
then
would,
that was it. Yeah.
and that was it. I
Yeah.
mean, she found like a pass to the Duma.
Yeah.
She remembers she was brought to Moscow. She, played piano with the French ambassador's daughter, stuff like that. He was obviously well connected in the party, so to speak.
Sure. When it's just I have so many questions. I'm like, where do I start? When you did the news conference, how did you execute that? Like what was that? How And what is your intent for all of this? Like, what is it, like, your big goal is what? You want the American public just to see it and say, look, this is as real as it gets. I was going about my retirement quietly. This landed in my lap. We should be looking at this. Somebody take it and analyze it and, let me know. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so the press conference was essentially like, well, let me do this and have some material to share, have sort of a basic message to
Mm,
see if we can get it out there and get it circulating. The book ends with a call, with an open invitation to the UFO, to the scientific community, to anybody.
yeah.
It's like, here it is. I don't know. So that was now the press conference I was able to structure a little bit better because by that time I had identified the connection to all those programs.
Right,
So
right.
there's
75 programs. Yeah.
right. So if so I can play the part of me that can pretend that the government actually means the things the government says. And so that's, what I'm leveraging. So if our representatives are saying they are having trouble breaking through the bureaucracy and the compartmentalization of all these programs that have been set up for decades. They can't get support. They can't get, they don't have the right clearance. They don't have all of these tools that they need to do their job effectively. My position at, then and now is, well, here's a way around it
Yeah.
because here's something that matches up to 95% of it. So let's ask about this and structure the questions in the way that somebody's going to perjure themselves if they don't answer, if they try to talk around it, because there is no talking around some of these things.
Right.
And so, that was so, well, what's the goal? I'm trying to be a good civic citizen.
Right.
My government is trying to answer questions and is being blocked. And I think I have a tool and a methodology that can help them do that.
Right.
And I don't I don't need to be the one doing it. I don't need to, I probably need to explain it to somebody, in depth, you
Right.
know, or
Yeah.
maybe they watch these videos and this is how
I
they're
was going to say they're
spelling it
100%
out for
watching
them.
this.
I don't know, but it'd be nice to do it over lunch, a nice catered lunch or something like that. I've done a lot of shit for a good meal. I don't need much.
You're like, I'm a simple man. Just feed
So
me.
I'm a simple man, exactly. Um, so that's the goal. It's listen, you're asking questions, right? So whether it is government or you're a scientist, you're a ufologist, um, and I'm trying to say, here's some materials that seem pretty legit,
Yeah.
and that is, I have as much began research into the subjects that I did, expecting to find nothing. And I don't ever find nothing for a good double negative sentence.
Yeah. No.
It's just one thing. So, the initial hope was that somebody of prominence and influence would want to take a deep dive into the materials to understand them and use them for the tools that they can be. Now, there's a MUFON investigator who his mind is blown because you ask, he'll tell you, he goes, this is the UFO find of the century. I don't understand how this is not the daily headline
Right.
of some new research that's been able to come out of this. We have some people who are doing that. We have, teams in New Orleans and out on the West Coast who are, we extracted the operating parameters of the craft and how it figures out, how it calculates, the magnetism and gravitational forces to identify potential spots to go UFO hunting and looking for them. So there's teams out there.
Pause. Pause. So So I know that we touched on this in our first little 5-minute conversation yesterday, and then I was like, "You need to be on the podcast tomorrow." From my layman's terms, I'm thinking, okay, there's some sort of magnetism involved. There are different spots on the Earth. There's more magnetism than others, and you're saying that these are UFO hotspots. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that what we've done is identify the areas, um, the number one area in each state to begin with that is the perfect conditions. Then you have to overlay that with some weather and atmospheric and space weather and
How
gravitational.
do you determine the perfect conditions first? Like, what layer is that?
So it's basically geology. It's the geology of areas.
Okay.
So, again, I'm not saying these things have to follow a specific highway, but it's like if the roads were magnetized, if we had magnetic levitating cars,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I'm sure you can go off the lane a little bit.
You
You
guys.
go outside the lane,
Yeah.
you're going to crash.
But what are they using to measure it? How do they know where there's more magnetism than other places? It's like,
I mean, what specific tools? I have no idea.
oh,
I
okay, so
mean,
it's just the,
we figured that out, right? I'm just using
yeah, yeah,
U.S. geological data,
got it,
to and NOAA and all the sort of public out there data
got
to
it,
say, what do I know about this craft? I know this craft needs to manipulate magnetic and gravitational fields,
got it.
right? So they have to be stronger some places than others. So it would make sense to me that at some point they should be within that window, let's say, of optimum efficiency as they're going about their business. Now there's other atmospheric phenomenon that happens because of what they're doing, like thunderstorms, high ionization atmospheres. So that I've sort of interpreted it as plus or minus 3 to 4 days on either side of a at high atmospheric or high ionization area would make sense as a good time to sort of be doing your thing, whatever it is your thing is doing. And so the first time I sort of tested the idea, just by using open source, reporting data, I was at like 60%. So when there was a sighting, 60% of the time it fell within this 100 to 150-mile radius of the predetermined optimum location. The
Stop it.
second time I ran it, where there were sightings, 85% of the time those sightings were within 50 to 150 miles of the predetermined thing. Now we've tightened it down where we're like, all right, now we're going to actually come up with 2 to 3 days for a team to go to a location and try and capture something on film, as well as have the detectors and all the equipment people use in doing these investigations to see, does it come together. The closest one we had, I had given a guy out in Oregon key dates and the dates and locations and all of that. Well, he wasn't able to, and he's like, oh, this kind of corresponds with other investigations and other things and reported sightings. So people often find it interesting that sort of what I come out with randomly happens to be hot spots,
Right, right.
in the areas. So this guy wasn't able to get, I think it was like October 22nd, I said was like the day,
Yeah.
try and get out there then. So he wasn't. Well, it turns out he's like at some MUFON event, and there's a couple that were in the park I told him to go to, in the time frame I told him to be there, who had a sighting.
Come on.
And they were telling the story, and he's like,
He's like, wait a
that's,
minute.
Gene said that's when it was gonna.
Dude, the most amount of emails and texts and follow up that you're going to get is people saying, where should I go to see a sighting? I want to
Listen,
go see UFOs.
I've got it all, on my website, www.engineeringinfinitybook.com. There's a pull down thing that says investigative resources. And so I've got like the 2025 map up there,
So
that's got
crazy.
the top location for each state, the geo coordinates, why it's a good location. I published the guide to, sort of the what to bring with you, how we come up with the numbers, all of the whole methodology is all public right there on the website to go check out. If it works, let me know. If you
All right.
wind up with like
Two,
some prize from it, I'll invite me to the party.
two questions about that. One, has anybody else ever done that? Like said, oh, these areas are probably UFO hotspots and go look at it. No, it's just because
Not that I know of.
not that you know of. And two, have the people that have been following your website and following these areas, has anybody come back to you with evidence?
No. So again, October was the first time I gave that guy the October 22nd dates.
Yeah, and we're still mid-November, November 19th, we're taping this.
Yes. There is currently, so last week I gave the people down south in New Orleans, I gave them a 30-day window, or I gave them the optimum days over the next 30 days. And then, some of it's like, and check the weather. So if there's, storms that pop up that are going to linger for 2 or 3 days, if you can drop what you're doing, and that's probably when you might want to, set everything up and go looking. So for the
Wow.
next month, they're toying around with the data that I gave them. See if we get anything.
I mean, if that starts hitting,
I think I only needed to hit once.
yeah, you're gonna get, I was saying, they're tornado chasers. You're gonna get lots of UFO chasers checking
Yeah.
that out.
Well, I mean, but that's what I want, I want people to do. I mean, and again, you can't tell from this anything, I have injuries and effects of Gulf War syndrome. I got a whole lot of stuff wrong with me. Outside of my house, I'm in a wheelchair, so I can't get to a lot of the areas that, I'd love to go to and sit out all night. And
Well, that was my next question was before you met your wife and stumbled upon all of this and you were doing all this work, were UFOs a thing for you? Were you, no, you were just going about your business?
no, just I always say it. I've been to watch Ancient Aliens. I always thought
Yeah.
that was fascinating. I
Yeah.
was always like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can get behind that. Couldn't care. Honestly, in a lot of ways, I still don't care now. People ask me, they're like, "What do you think of Three Eye Atlas?" I'm like, I really don't care. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't. It's
Maybe that's the mothership that was going by the,
maybe,
by the sun.
listen. I hope. I know I'm supposed to say, I hope they find out. Whatever it is, whoever it is that's interested in it, I hope they find out whatever it is that they want to find out from it. Doesn't get me my fucking lunch on Wednesday any faster, so I really don't. I don't care. The videos, the thing. Look, they're interesting. I don't know what anything is. I don't know. Now I can look at videos sometimes and see things and be like, from my father-in-law's work, I can tell you this is why it looks like that. But nobody wants to hear that.
Like what? Like, give me an example.
Why is it blue?
Why?
I can tell you it's blue because the materials that he describes that the hull is made out of the ship, that if it had a high ionization charge, would be blue.
Huh.
Nobody wants to hear that.
Why?
They want it to be blue because some fucking numerology thing
Right.
says that blue is the color of the aura of the
Right.
Galactic Federation that's part of the
Right.
Subterranean Lizard Alliance.
Right. 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 Right.
Okay. So, to me, we know there's videos, we know people see stuff. I think we're so far beyond that that all of the, all of the analyzing of, to me, the thing is, so what?
Mm.
Great, you got a video of the thing. The government is not going to be like, you caught this one on
Yeah, you
video.
got us.
This is shit. This is the one. Yeah, well, now we got to tell you, right?
Right.
That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen with this, in that way.
Right.
But what it does is, it's it's why I wrote finally finished my book on my oil and gas experience, which if I was ever going to write a book, that's the only book in my life I ever wanted to write, was to get all of that out there. But and this really inspired me to do it because it's about the same thing. In oil and gas, I dealt with, it was the national security state and big oil and energy security going
Mm,
hand in hand. This is the national security state and the UAP industrial complex
mm,
hand in hand,
mm.
and everything else is part of, psyops and counterintelligence narratives and narrative control, which are real things. Don't get me wrong. The degrees to which people think, it's impacting their daily lives are a bit skewed, and some folks need reality checks on.
Mhm.
But the core fundamental idea of what's around us, and if there's anything to break through and to break down, it is the relationship between the national security state and the UAP industrial complex that has been sort of buried within the defense industrial complex, and
Right,
bring out those things that not only dismantle it from a transparency and secrecy point of view, but bring forward the technologies that could actually be beneficial to mankind.
right.
So that's sort of my
Yeah,
mission in all of this.
yeah. I wanna
Booga
clap.
Spears, the rest of them
Yeah.
don't care.
It's interesting, though, because everything that you just said, I agree with, and it's also every reason why every government would not want to share that information, because from what I'm gleaning from it in terms of I'll go back to the consciousness evolution, people are easier to govern when they're listening to the government, and if those realities of a consciousness evolving and us, from where I sit, I would view that as bringing more peace to the world, and maybe that's not something that industrial complex wants. They want to control the information and control what's going on.
Well, I think it's because the first thing anybody goes to is weaponization, right? Oh,
Right.
if somebody knows we have this or they have this technology, they can weaponize it and da 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 da. Great. Well, we already kind of face that issue on a smaller scale, with handguns, right?
Yeah.
And rifles. Private industry builds handguns and rifles. They build certain versions for governments. They build certain versions for the state of Massachusetts. They build certain versions, that do all sorts of fun things to sell to folks out in Utah, right?
Mhm.
So there are frameworks for that stuff. We have frameworks for the management and control of nuclear technology. So doesn't mean we have to let people build their own, thermonuclear substations in their house to power their home project UFO
Yeah. Yeah. That we could
kind of
trick
thing.
people to not touch it. What
So
about yeah, go, go,
yeah,
go.
no, no, so I was just saying along that line. So, you can begin to break down I think the more apropos national security issue becomes when you're talking about people's religious beliefs and the histories, and
Right.
getting not and that's where I think the effort needs to go, right? It needs to go into preparing institutions that touch people's daily lives to deal with these changes in the or ontological record or whatever that means going forward, and maybe a lot of that's happening behind the scenes already.
Mhm.
So if there's effort to be had, that's it. And and regardless, we're still going to have the people who say, I'm interacting telepathically with the Galactic Federation right now, and they're telling me that this is an okay. Well, I'm sure if the Galactic Federation has a message, they'll figure it out. They'll
Right.
figure it out. Who needs to get the message to make things whichever way they need to be made?
Right.
If the Galactic Federation can legitimately interact with whomever via telepathy, I
Yeah.
think let's figure that they're going to have that covered.
I'm like, I was gonna say, what do you say to people? There was a CIA program in remote viewing, and
Yes.
they were saying that they could do it and proving that it's there. I'm interviewing on the podcast Thomas Campbell, who is a physicist that wrote the book my big toe, my big theory of everything. And he says, it's a simulation. We're all connected to one consciousness that we can meditate, go into that consciousness, go across, come back down, and view something. I interviewed another doctor who proved telepathy in the 70s through scientific method. It worked. I said, how did it work? He goes, I don't know, but I know I proved it.
I mean, and that's what I think it's there.
Yeah.
It's the tuning,
Yeah.
right? And that's all these guys are talking about is they've figured out there are some ways to adjust those tuners.
Yeah.
How it happens, what's the mechanics behind it is still the mystery, but it shows we have the capacity to do it. We have our brains are designed to get there,
Yeah.
but there's also seems to be this sort of universal natural order of things, and we're not going to get there any sooner than we're meant to get there. So don't mess with it and don't push it.
That's interesting. That is interesting.
Yeah, you want one more mind blowing one?
Yeah, man. Keep going.
My last AM theory that came to me was that, my father-in-law talks about this information energy field, and it probably much like your other guests have discussed. And, what I wonder is that are the algorithms and the programs that we've created for AI, they are not limited to the tuning that our consciousness is. So when AI starts running amok on its own, when it's hallucinating, when it's doing these things, is it truly bugging or is it just accessing the information energy field because we've designed it to work like a neural network, but it's not limited by our biological factors that control whatever tuning it is that we have. So in creating the simulated neural network, to tie into information, it's just pulling information that just might not have happened on our timeline. It still might have happened. And that's why we have glitches in the matrix, why we have Mandela effect, why people say, oh, we're living in a simulation. No, we're living in a secular, time is a secular, universal reality. And we are just tuned into a specific element of it. And it is because the systems we've developed aren't limited by that, that they're just pulling in what they think is the right information, but it just might have happened on a different timeline. It just might have happened in a different cycle that hasn't been synced yet. I called it synchronization shock is my working theory of it.
Because the AI is like leaping at our own evolution and
Well,
getting into the information.
if we look at quantum entanglement saying the two things happen in and it's not and it doesn't happen until it's observed,
Right.
then if you're thinking about an AI neural network that is trying to access this information that's been created without there being some sort of guardrails or other parameters that replace the tuning factor of consciousness. Does it? You'd think I went to fucking school for this, right?
Dude,
This is
it's, I
this
mean,
is this is how my brain has functioned since I've started living with this stuff.
that
And I'm
makes
like, well,
sense
then
to
it
me.
only makes
I'm
sense.
laughing because it makes sense to me. I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, yeah, that's what's happening.
that's what's happening. There is a version of reality where Fruit of the Looms has a
Yeah, right. The Mandela
utopia.
effect thing. Yeah.
And at one point we might have, and at one point, us Gen Xers, we might have been in that time circle, but as the next time circle ebbed and flowed and morphed,
Off just a touch.
it went off just a bit. And because now society isn't as, the global societies aren't as separated as they are or as they used to be, and information flows so much faster and much more direct and now is stored and now we can recall it and we can look at it again and all of these things we couldn't do before, and now we're programming systems to go find it for us. It's finding what's out there, it just hasn't synchronized yet.
Love that. So do we think then, I want to go deeper into this. So I'm thinking when you mentioned 2024 and, oh, crazy year, but like every year has been, I feel like since 2020 has been crazy, but I feel like 2024 was like the year of AI.
I mean, Nat's, she's aside from being an international opera singer, she holds a master's in IT engineering and AI and robotics, of course,
Of course she does. Yeah.
right? She's looking at, PhD programs now just to be on the safe side. She says it all the time. She's like, well, look at AI, look at cell phones, look at, all this stuff. How did we get it? How did it? And she talks about that exactly that how exponent her ex, my son's birth father, he's a PhD in machine learning. And even, he'll say the speed at which the development and maturing of AI has occurred is
Yeah.
beyond what it should be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that a matter of we designed it too good and it's sort of taken over, the life of its own? Is it a matter of somebody suddenly data dropped the secret sauce to
Yeah.
whoever?
In order to hit the fast forward button.
Oh,
Lots to ponder. Good Lord, Gene. That
well, that's life. That's,
you did not disappoint, man. I feel like I've taken enough of your time, but this is fascinating. I thank you for allowing us to go on that journey inside your brain. I
I
hope,
appreciate you, listen, at the end of the day, my thing in all this is, I've lived deep in this material for the
yeah,
last 5 years now.
yeah,
I'm parroting what I've learned from it. It's certainly, the neurons have certainly expanded and sort of made me look at things differently.
yeah,
And all I can say is it's out there for anybody who, is educated on this, on these subjects. There's other people who own their own advanced propulsion laboratories have at it because I think other people have found stuff in it. And my main call to action, let's say, is this idea of if there are people, and anybody can replicate the work that I've done trying to compare what's in there to programs. And let's make the case if our representatives are truly seeking these answers
yeah,
and they are truly being roadblocked, down all avenues. It's a utility. You can use, you don't need to credit, you don't need to plug it, whatever. There's a path that's,
yeah,
that's in there.
yeah.
And if it's all wrong and somebody has that information, let me know so I stop making an ass of myself. I mean,
You're like, I'd like to enjoy my retirement,
I'd
please.
like right. I mean, I was, in between this, I was, producing operas. I'd love to just get back to, making opera.
Yeah, that's awesome. Before you go, give everybody the name of the books, plural, and your
Yep.
website so they know how to get all this
Yeah,
information.
thanks. So my father-in-law's translated works, they are in the book Engineering Infinity, Earth's First Interstellar Blueprint. That is at engineeringinfinitybook.com. If you just put in engineeringinfinity.com, you're going to wind up at another book that is not as exciting by any means. Not to, no disrespect.
No disrespect.
December 9th, my own origin story, as I like to call it now, my 20-year background from the military and particularly focused on oil and gas. That comes out. It's available right now for pre-sale on Barnes and Noble
Cool.
exclusively, and that is essentially, tells the it's my unmasking my breakdown of that national security, big oil intelligence state and network, all the dirty little secrets behind what goes into putting gas in your car, and you will feel horrible about yourself as a human being the next time you fill up, surely.
Uh,
By the time you're done reading, it's about 400 pages. But that is titled Unconventional, a story of oil intelligence and consequences. I go into some of my personal, personal impacts of doing that kind of work over more than a decade, almost 2 decades.
wow. Wow. Fascinating stuff, Gene. Thanks so much, man.
I appreciate it.
Love to have you back because I know there's going to be so many updates. Like there's going to be some interesting stuff that unfolds for you as time goes on here, I think.
Anytime, yeah, I'm happy to. And anybody that goes out and finds anything or reports it back to you, let me know. I'm happy. I will come on. I will drop what I'm doing and come on live streams and look at stuff and talk to people. I'm happy to have the conversation and happy to teach other people sort of what I know out of all of this in the hopes they go do it. And again, I can just get back to being retired.
It's so great, man. Thanks so much, Gene. I appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for watching the Quantum Shift podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, comment, and share.